Hiya everyone, I hope you're all safe and well and having a good day. I was meant to film a few hours ago, there was a big thunder and lightning storm and now there's a fly in the room and it won't get out. There's nothing I can do about him. I've asked him politely to leave and he won't, so. But we're going to power through. I'm just very sorry if you can hear something buzzing around. I just wanted to say before I start the case, thank you so much for all of the support on the last video. I couldn't believe how many views it got and how many people liked it. I was just so happy. It was my fastest growing video that I've uploaded so far, and it was just really nice seeing everything like kind of pay off and, you know, have loads of people watching it. So thank you so much. So this case today, I actually remember being on the news. It was in 2012 that it happened, and I remember just thinking it looked really interesting. So a few years later in college, we had to do a little project and I picked this case. I only looked into it briefly a few years ago, but then when I came around to looking into it again, I just found so much more information that I didn't know about. I know a lot of people in America may know of this case already, but I know of a lot of people in the UK that haven't heard of it when I talked to them about it, so I really wanted to cover it and look into it again. Either way, if you've heard about it before or you haven't, I hope you hear something new in this video. In 2012, in Aurora, Colorado in the USA, James Holmes went into the midnight screening of Batman: The Dark Knight Rises and he opened fire on an audience full of people. He had dyed bright orange hair and he was described as a loner, and straight away the media said he did it because he was delusional and he thought that he was the Joker. And to them that explained why he picked Batman to do it at as well. So was this man insane, or was it a careful plan to kill as many people as possible? James Holmes was born on December the 13th in 1987 in San Diego, California. His mum and dad were a mathematician and a psychiatric nurse, and they were called Robert and Arlene Holmes. James Holmes also had a sister, but she isn't mentioned too much in this case. His mum and dad were really nice people. They both met at Berkeley, they had a really nice life. James had a nice upbringing and he just seemed like a regular child. When James went to elementary or primary school, if you're in the UK, they actually moved to Oak Hills in California, but when he was 12 they moved back to San Diego and he had to make new friends all over again, and it's said that this is when he started to decline socially and mentally. It's said that when James was 11 years old, he actually attempted suicide, which is really young to be doing something like that. But his parents didn't know anything about this and they didn't interpret any mental illness from James. When James was a child, he said that he was scared of these things called nail ghosts who would hammer on the walls at night, and he'd also see shapes and shadows in his peripheral vision of things like fighting each other and cutting each other's heads off with saws and weapons and shooting each other. He'd just see these things all the time. It's not made clear if he actually told anyone about this or if this came up later in his life. As a teenager, he seemed pretty normal as well. He'd go to church regularly with his family. He graduated Westview High School in 2006 and he played football or soccer, and he ran on the cross-country team as well. In 2008, he was a counsellor in a summer camp in Glendale, California for kids aged 7 to 14, and he was responsible for 10 kids at that time. James was quite well liked by everyone. He was never described as the life of the party or the most charismatic person, but he had friends. He was never alone and he was never bullied. After high school, James got an internship at the Salk Institute of Biological Studies, but that didn't go down too well. He was described as stubborn and socially inept, and he didn't finish the project that he was working on there. It was a coding project, which wasn't ever his strong point, but he just decided to give up because he had this bad feedback. But in his application to another school, he wrote, "I had little experience in computer programming and the work was challenging to say the least. Nevertheless, I taught myself how to program in Flash, then construct a cross-temporal calibration model. Completing the project and presenting my model at the end of the internship was exhilarating." So he kind of fibbed to get himself into school because he never finished that project. In 2010, he attended the University of California, Riverside, and he got a bachelor's degree in neuroscience with the highest honours. He had a really positive experience in this university and he was described as an effective group leader and someone who takes an active role in his education. He moved to Aurora, Colorado, where he lived on Parish Street in a one-bedroom apartment. In the apartment complex he lived in, there were other medical students who were studying the same course as him. There were professors there were some patients as well. There were just lots and lots of people who were linked to the university, and the University of Colorado is where he was going to study next, and he was actually studying for a PhD in neuroscience. And this course let 3 people in a year, so that just shows you how intelligent this man was. And James was really interested in psychology as well. He was studying something called temporal illusions, which is like a loss of memory or a loss of time. Like you lose a big chunk of your day, you don't know where it's gone, and it's just absolutely nothing. It also includes being able to implant memories or create new ones or link a different feeling to a specific memory. It's basically like rewriting your own mind from what I can understand. But James kept getting his grades back from his course, and it would always say that there were things that he could improve on which he didn't like too much. The people who studied with James said that he was quiet but nice. Same as school really, people still had the same kind of opinion of him. He worked in a vitamin coating factory and he would just stop responding sometimes. He'd just stare at the wall, and when people would approach him, he'd just smile or smirk and then walk away. So while James was studying, he actually got a girlfriend and they went out for about 2 months. But unfortunately it didn't work out, and his girlfriend said that once they were out on a date and he just spent the whole time talking to another man. He'd also make jokes that made people feel uncomfortable, and it just wasn't working out between them. But one of the biggest things was that he'd actually expressed interest in killing people to her. And I think this is a bit of a tricky one because I think a lot of people go, oh, I want to kill him or I could kill them. And you don't automatically go, oh, you need help, you need to call the police. You don't kind of freak out like that. So I think the girlfriend may have thought it was just all talk. I think the way he was saying it wasn't completely alarming, but just wasn't normal. So she suggested that James sees a therapist, and she didn't expect him to do that. But he actually did. He started going to the university psychologist. He'd been to a psychologist before and he was just diagnosed with being depressed. He wasn't diagnosed with anything else. But he started seeing Dr. Lynn Fenton and he opened up to her a little bit more. He told her a little bit about his past, and he also expressed interest in killing people and said that he'd been obsessed with death for nearly a decade. And he said the same thing to Lynn as he had to his girlfriend. He said that he wanted to kill a lot of people. Unfortunately, the doctor thought he was just borderline and was just kind of talking or wondering, the same as his girlfriend did, so she didn't really take it too much further. But she did call his mum, the campus security and the behavioural and threat assessment at the university. I think they respond to threats of staff or anything else, general well-being of everyone who attends or works at the university. They try and keep everyone safe. They responded previously to an incident where a student had picked up a pencil and said to a tutor, I'm going to shove this in your eye, and there was still a meeting about it, so I don't know why James's thing wasn't taken seriously. Nothing happened about James's comments. Dr. Fenton said that he was having homicidal thoughts around 3 or 4 times a day, according to him. She also reported that he was being a little bit patronising and disrespectful to her, and she thought it may be because she was a woman, so she referred James to a male doctor. James and his girlfriend got back together for about a month and they had a nice Valentine's Day together, but on the 20th of February of 2012 she decided again that it wasn't working and broke it off for a second time. And James said that the reason for this whole breakup was because of his depression, and that's what he blamed. So at this point, James is depressed, he's having weird thoughts, his girlfriend's gone, he's failing academically, so he starts planning the most horrific thing he can think of, which is to kill as many people as possible. And he started this planning in a notebook, which I'm going to go into more detail about later, so just remember, he has a notebook through all of this. James keeps in touch with his mum and dad once a week or so by email, because that's just how he prefers to talk, and everything on the email seems completely fine. He's having casual conversations about his mum learning Spanish and things like that, just really normal conversations that you'd have just as a catch-up. But meanwhile, James was actually starting to make some purchases for his plan. A lot of people are really confused about where James got the money for all these things from, and I actually found out that he got a grant of about 22 grand for his studies. It was meant to last him all the time that he was in university, but it didn't. On May the 10th, he bought his first purchase, which was a shotgun. He bought tyre spikes or stingers, I'm not sure which one they're called, I've heard both, but he bought those so if someone came after him, he would be able to chuck it out the car, pop the tyres. Through May and June of that year, he was just constantly stocking up on weapons and other things, and he was obsessed with this plan. He bought a pistol and a rifle, and he bought 3,000 rounds for each of those guns, and he bought 350 rounds for his shotgun. He also bought a stab-proof vest, a knife, gas masks, a helmet, throat protectors and groin protectors too. Just all sorts. He was really kitting himself out. On June the 7th, he failed a really important exam for his PhD and it devastated him. After all his work, he decided he didn't want to carry on with the course, so he left, and on June the 14th, he filed for unemployment. But because he'd left the university as well, it meant that he wasn't seen as a psychologist anymore. On June the 23rd, he signed up to join a shooting range and also to learn how to ride a motorbike. James didn't turn up to the first class, which is usually a health and safety class, like an orientation thing, and the gun club owner rang him up and tried to get in touch, like, hi, we're here, we can't carry on if you don't come to this first class. When the owner called him, he got through to his voicemail and it was just growling sounds down the phone, and he didn't think a whole lot of it because some people have just weird things on their voicemails, so he wasn't too worried. But he did say to all the staff, if this man calls back, don't register him, like, I want to speak to him and hopefully see him face to face just to check everything out to make sure. James went to a few classes, but again he started missing them, and he'd leave really weird voicemail messages on the gun club owner's voicemail, so it was just, again, him growling, slurring his words, not sounding like someone you'd want to hand a gun to. On July the 5th, 15 days before the shooting, James created a profile on a website called Friend Finder, which is like a dating website. On this profile, there were really strange images that he'd uploaded of himself, and also a message saying, will you visit me in prison? And this account was accessed until July the 18th, which was 2 days before the shooting. 2 weeks before the shooting, he spoke to a student and asked if they'd heard of something called dysphoric mania, and he also said to stay away from him because he was bad news. So the day the shooting comes around, which is July the 20th, 2012. It said that in the morning, James tried to go and see the psychiatrist, but the doors were locked, so he couldn't go in. So instead, he sent his notebook to the psychiatrist. Some say he sent it a few days before, but there's conflicting information on that. Some say it was the day of. I don't know. Either way, he sent his notebook to the psychiatrist. He's got 3 tickets to The Dark Knight Rises, all for Theatre 8. James carefully set up some things and then left his apartment. I'm saying set up some things because I'm going to talk about it later, along with the notebook. James took a painkiller and at around 11 o'clock he headed to the cinema. It was about 5 miles from his apartment and it was the Century 16 movie theatre, and it was a mall cinema. When he got there were so many people there for the midnight showing. There were people in cosplay, there were just families around, groups of friends, so there were more screens open than it was expected. Screens 7, 8 and 9 were the ones showing the film. There were around 400 people in attendance and James actually went into Theatre 9. James went into screen 9 and he sat and watched the film for about 20 minutes until it looked like he got a phone call, so he went out and exited to the side of the theatre. He'd kept the door open with a tablecloth peg, you know, the things that you use so your tablecloth doesn't blow away in the wind if you're having a barbecue or something, because he needed something small enough that people wouldn't notice that the door was still open, because I'm sure someone will get annoyed that they were letting light into the pictures, so they would just go up, close the door behind him, and he wouldn't have been able to get back in. James went outside and he started putting on all the armour and protective gear that he bought. This was helmet, groin protectors, throat protectors, a gas mask, armour, everything you could think of to protect yourself. James had it. He said he was putting everything on and he dropped a tear gas container under the car and he bent down to try and get it from under the car, but then eventually he just gave up because he wanted to go back in. But James said he stood frozen at the door for about 2 minutes, and he says he's not 100% sure it was 2 minutes, but he knew that he was there and he was frozen for a period of time before going in. Eventually James did go in and he threw a tear gas canister right into the audience. At first people thought he was in costume and this was a prank because there were people in costume cosplay. It was a midnight screening of a film that was really popular. There were a lot of costumes around, and because of all of his gear he kind of looked like Bane, which is a character from the film if you're not familiar with it. Witnesses also reported that everyone thought it was fireworks too. But after the gas was thrown, that's when James started to shoot. People had started running to the top left of the theatre and he knew that people were gathered there. They were running away from the tear gas, so then he shot up there. There's conflicting reports that James stood there in the same place pretty much for the whole time he shot at people, and there's other reports that say he actually walked in front of the screen and up and down the aisles to shoot. So again, conflicting, I'm not 100% sure which is right, but he was shooting people in the theatre. He emptied the shotgun and pulled out his rifle with 100 rounds in. One of his guns jammed about 40 seconds into the shooting, and apparently James was saying he was really upset about this because he wanted to use that one, he was looking forward to it. I think it was the quickest firing gun, it shot 1 round per second. So James is firing randomly around the theatre, and all these people are trying to get away as fast as they can. They're all dropping behind the seats, lying down, crawling. Some of them even just run for the exit and try and get away as fast as they can. He shot his handgun 5 times, and apparently the bullets were even going through to the theatre next door, which was Theatre 8 or Screen 8. I've been alternating calling them Screen or Theatre 8, but you know what I mean, the different rooms in the theatre. So there was tear gas going through to the screen next door, and they were actually evacuated and the fire alarm started going off. One of the women in Screen 8 had said that she was really nervous to leave the screen because she'd been told that the shooter was in the lobby, so she really didn't want to go. James Holmes fired a total of 76 shots. There was 6 from the shotgun, 65 from the rifle, and 5 from the handgun. One of the witnesses, Farah Soudini, I hope I've said her name right, she was there with her boyfriend at the time. She was hit. She said she felt his side and it felt wet and warm until she looked down and her organs were falling out of her body. She was holding them in and her boyfriend was helping her hold them in as well. He'd also been shot in the arm, but he was still trying to help her. Her calf had also been hit, and she describes it as being hanging on by a thread. She said you could hear people screaming all around, and she said you could tell that people were being shot, depending on how they screamed. Her boyfriend's dad took his shirt off to try and cover her and help her, and her boyfriend's dad's girlfriend came back and was hitting her, talking to her, trying to make her not fall asleep because all she wanted to do was to shut her eyes. Luckily, she was taken out by officers after James Holmes had left the theatre. She needed 7 surgeries. A friend of Jessica Gowie, which was one of the victims, said that he pulled them both down to the floor. All the bullets were being fired around them. There was popcorn and fizzy drinks spraying everywhere. They were crawling around and trying to lie flat on the floor behind some seats, and he had his phone out to call 911. He was getting a busy message from 911, and when he looked back at his friend, he said that brain matter was exposed and he knew that she was gone. So he prayed over her body because he didn't know what else to do and he wanted to do as much for her as he could. After he realised that Jessica had passed away, he knew that he needed to get himself out. He said that there was a moment when he saw a man get up and run straight to the exit and he didn't hear a shot fired. So he knew that that was the time to run, and that's when he got out. He had to ring Jessica's mum and his own mum and break the news about her passing away. As well as the survivors that have to live with all of these things, unfortunately 12 people lost their lives that night. 10 people died on location and 2 people died in hospital. The youngest injured was just 3 months old and the youngest killed was 6 years old. The police were called at 12:39 and they arrived within 90 seconds. The first call happened just moments after the shooting started and it was from inside the theatre. 30 gunshots were heard during this call. The second call was a teenage girl saying that her cousins had been shot and the dispatcher was trying to teach her how to do CPR on them, and she was saying, "I can't hear you," because of all the chaos that was going on around her. There's around 24 minutes of the police radio from that night, and they think at first that one person's been shot in the theatre. They talk a lot about things being Sable Side, which is by Sable Boulevard, they mean that side of the theatre, and they say that there's a white car there. They know that they're looking for someone in a gas mask, and you can hear them on the radio saying, "Is this our suspect? Like, is that man our suspect?" But at first they think that he's an officer. He's kitted out in all of this gear and he's just leaning against the car, and they think that he's maybe been shot by someone. I'm not sure if someone notices that it's not the correct uniform or whatever, but they finally figure out that that's the man who's just done this, and he's just standing there waiting to be arrested basically. A lot of the people who were injured were taken to the hospital in unmarked police cars, squad cars, anything basically just to try and get them there, because there were that many people who just poured out of the theatre. They couldn't get to a lot of the people who were injured. When the police approached James at his car, there was a rumour that said James had said to them straight away, "I'm the Joker," and James has said he never said that. And honestly, for years, I had said to people, oh, did you hear about the guy who shot everyone in the cinema because he thought he was the Joker? I thought that's what the story was, but he never said that to the police. What I think's happened is that they saw his colourful hair and they thought there's a lot of people dressed up tonight, maybe he was dressed as a Joker, and then said, oh, he's the Joker. I think that might have been what happened, but you can never be sure. But all of the papers went with that as he thought he was the Joker. That's where that whole thing came from. And it fits the story that someone would do that, to go into a Batman shooting as the Joker, create just the most horrible, horrific thing you could imagine and leave. It fits, but apparently that's not what happened. Apparently that was all the media who blew that up. So you'll remember me saying that James had taken motorbike lessons, he'd bought the tyre shredders, stuff to help him get away, but he wasn't getting away. He was just standing there waiting to be arrested. The reason for that was that one part of his plan had gone as he wanted it to, which was the shooting. He'd killed a lot of people, caused a lot of upset. For some reason that's what he wanted. Never understand it, won't go off on one. But the other side of his plan hadn't worked, and that was what he had set up in his apartment. He confessed straight away to the police that his apartment was actually booby-trapped. And the reason he'd done that was that he wanted all of the police and emergency services to have been called to his apartment for a big explosion to have gone off, and there would be more time to kill people at the theatre. It was completely covered with explosives that were described as sophisticated. There were bullets, gunpowder, lighter fluid, flammable liquid, and they were all attached to a tripwire that was going to set them all off. And that was about 5 metres from the front door. There were homemade grenades, gunpowder, just every kind of flammable thing you can imagine was in that apartment, all set up, and there was also a control box in the kitchen that was wired to all of these things. I can't really get my head around how all of this would have worked, but the expert that came in to defuse everything said that if it would have gone up, it would have taken up the entire 3rd floor that he was on, and it would have shattered the walls and windows around all the surrounding buildings. So he hadn't set a timer on these explosives or anything. What he'd done was he'd played his music super loud in the hopes that someone would knock the door in and get so mad that they'd just want to get in and get him, and they'd set off the explosives, or they'd call the police and the police would come in, knock the door down and set off the explosives. One of his neighbours heard the music, got annoyed, went to his door, but when she saw the door was open and unlocked, she just went back downstairs. But eventually one of his neighbours called the police at around midnight, but by that time the shooting was getting a lot more attention, obviously, so there were no police around at the time to get to the call. They just hadn't got around to it yet, and by the time they were going to get around to it, the shooting had happened, so it didn't work out well for them. They weren't going to go for a noise complaint after this whole massacre had happened. He'd also set up another explosive in a bin bag which was next to a bin outside. It's not made clear whether this was a separate explosive or it was going to set off the explosives in the apartment. He put a remote control car and a remote control in a bin bag, and he put a boom box in with it as well, so that the music would attract people. They'd go to the bin, get it out and start playing with the control to try and play with the car. And someone just robbed the boom box and just got off. Didn't play with the car, didn't set off any kind of explosive, just was like, oh, it's a boombox, just left. So the police had to evacuate the 5 surrounding buildings, including James's. They sent a robot in the next day to spray water over everything and to also have a little look around at what was going on. I think they have like cameras on them and they can see the apartment properly. By July the 23rd, all the evidence was collected that they needed from the apartment. So all the surrounding apartments were able to go back, and also James's apartment was able to go back 6 days later after everywhere had been thoroughly searched for any more devices. A few of the hospitals that the victims were treated at actually lowered their medical bills significantly or just let them go completely, which I thought was really lovely. $5 million was raised by Community First for all the victims and the families. And on November the 6th in 2012, the Aurora Relief Fund gave $220,000 to each victim. So straight away when James was taken by the police, he was acting very strange. He was acting as if he didn't really know what was going on. He was out of it. But as they were driving away in the cop car, he did want to watch the aftermath. In his first interrogation or interview with the police, they put paper bags over his hands to preserve any gunpowder residue, which is a common practice, and he was using them as sock puppets. He asked what they were for, and when the officer said, "What do you think?" he was like, "Popcorn." He just had no clue, was completely out of it, and was just answering like one-syllable answers to everything. As well as that, James pulled a staple out of the table and tried to put it in a plug socket, so that got him put on suicide watch and in solitary confinement. 3 days after the shooting, on July the 23rd, was James's first court appearance. He still had his red hair, he was still acting dazed out of it, like he didn't really understand what was going on. He was given his rights and there was no bail that was set for him. On the 30th of July, his formal charges were announced. It was 24 counts of first-degree murder, 116 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 1 count of illegal possession of explosives. But for each victim, there were 2 charges filed. For each victim, there was a count of murder with deliberation, and 1 count of murder for extreme indifference. James agreed to waive his preliminary hearing, and his attorney said that he was mentally ill and that they needed to assess him. On August the 30th, it was announced that James's notebook, which could be used as evidence in the case, was covered by doctor-patient confidentiality. Because it had been addressed and sent to a psychiatrist, they weren't allowed to use it. On September the 19th, the prosecutors wanted to add 10 more charges to James's case, which would bring the total to 152 charges in total. The hearing was set for January 2013, but James's defence team kept putting it off. They just wanted more time on this. And it was because they were trying to get all the information they could for an insanity defence for James. And in June of 2013, the insanity defence was accepted. So that was accepted in 2013, but the jury selection didn't happen until 2015 in January. This lasted for 3 months and 9,000 candidates were summoned, which is the largest jury in US history. 19 women and 5 men were selected, but it's argued that some of those people maybe shouldn't have been on the jury. 2 of the jurors had ties to the Columbine shooting in 1999. 1 was an auntie of a survivor and 1 was an old friend of the shooters themselves. James didn't tend to speak in his trials, but there were videos of him talking to his psychologists that were played in the courtroom. I find these videos really interesting because it's where the debate comes in, whether he is insane or whether he just knew exactly what to say if he was that intelligent. So James didn't deny any of the shooting at any point. He said that he was on autopilot for the whole thing. He played really loud techno music through Bluetooth headphones, and he said he just couldn't really see, smell, hear anything. He knew what he was doing, but he wasn't watching it happen really. It was just happening to him, he felt. He said he did hear one person scream in the top left corner, which is where a lot of people ran to escape the tear gas, and he said he started shooting there, but other than that he wasn't really shooting at people in particular unless they kind of caught his eye a little bit, and then he would just shoot at them for running away, because he said if people ran away he wouldn't have control over the situation anymore. So his gun misfired and he stepped a little bit further into the room to try and get some light to try and refill it, and that's when a lot of the people ran out. When James was asked if he was a danger to society, he said, "Well, I've killed before, so it's likely I'll kill someone again." And he was also asked if the prison guard should maybe be worried about him, and he said, "I'd say so, yeah." James describes being on autopilot, losing memory, everything like that, and that was actually what he was studying in university. So again, with the insanity thing, it's whether he just knew what to say. No one really knows. Or did this actually happen to him subconsciously because he knew so much about it? Eventually, the notebook's able to be used in the trial. It turned up in Dr. Fenton's pigeonhole in the university. There's mixed reports on when this was found, and there's a bit of tension around that as well. Some people think that it was left there before the murder, and had the doctor found it and seen it, it may have been prevented. Maybe she could have done something. Some people say it was the day of the murder, and that would protect the university from any accusations of not taking things into their own hands. And some say it was a few days later, so there's different reports. Not sure which is true. But in this notebook there's tons and tons of planning on how he would do this, what he would do, where he'd do it. There was a lot that went into it, and this is something that the people prosecuting thought, you know, if you can plan this much, then it wasn't a spur of the moment insane thing to do. This was thought about, this was planned, and a lot of people think that you can't be that insane and plan things, but then on the other hand they think you can have that much of a one-track mind if you're insane, that you can just obsess over this event that's going to happen and you're really excited about it and then you're going to carry it out. So all of this is from his notebook. At first James had planned that he was going to go on a hiking trail and he was going to abduct and kill people that way. There was a lot of scribbles about the meaning of life and about his life, and in it said life equals 0. It was shown that James believed through all of his diagrams and things in his notebook that for every person he killed, he believed he got a point which would add more value to his life. And even though that sounds just so strange, that was the main reason for him to kill people. Which is why if you watch his whole trial, which is all on YouTube by the way, the prosecution says he killed to make himself feel better. So James had thought about being a serial killer, but he decided that it would take too long. On page 48 he wrote all about pros and cons of committing a mass murder. It had stuff like methods, bombs, too regulated and too suspicious. Serial killer, too personal, too much evidence, easily caught, few kills. Venue, airport, too much security, and terrorism. And then it says, terrorism isn't the message is there is no message. So in his notebook he'd decided on a movie theatre. And it said near the end of the planning, no fear of consequences, being caught is 99% certain. On the 27th of April 2015, James's trial began. As I said, it's all on YouTube, it's really interesting, there's tons more witness statements in a lot more detail than I can go into. There were 24 jurors. The opening statements from the prosecution said that James knew exactly what he was doing, this was planned, you can see it in his notebook, he wanted to do this and he did it, he went through with it, that's it. Whereas the defence said, yeah, there's no denying that he actually did this, but he's mentally ill. He wasn't in control of his actions, it wasn't his fault in a way. James was described as being mentally ill but legally sane. He was diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder, if I'm saying that right, and that's basically a really big difficulty relating to others. James denied the chance to testify on July the 9th. On July the 10th, James's defence showed videos of him in his cell, acting strange, banging his head against the wall, running up the wall, trying to get under the blankets while he was naked and tied to the bed. They were really pushing this insanity side of things. James's family testified for him, saying that he was mentally ill, he didn't deserve to die. And after a deliberation of 12 hours, James Holmes was charged with 140 counts of attempted first-degree murder, 1 count of possessing explosives, and he was given life without parole. He was spared death because one juror didn't want him to die, just because they thought there was a chance that he may have mental health problems. James Holmes was given 12 life sentences, and all of his years combined added up to 3,318 years in prison. That's the longest sentence anyone's ever got in US history. They never want him to be free, and in his first month in prison he was actually attacked by another inmate. A guard had accidentally released a gate that was separating the two of them and James was beat up basically. He was moved out of state and his location was kept a secret for his safety, and that really upset a lot of the victims and the families of the victims of the shooting, and obviously they weren't happy with that. Why does he get to be safe and have privacy? Eventually though, the information was released in 2017 and he's being held in a maximum security prison in Pennsylvania. With this case there's a lot of mixed information and mixed reports, and it is a very strange one. If you look into it, there's just so much to look at and everyone seems to say different things. And there's also quite a few conspiracy theories behind this case as well. So I'm not going to talk about them all because honestly I would be here all day, but it's really interesting if you want to look into them. But the main one is that there was a second shooter. When a few of the first calls came in, they said that there was a man with a red backpack, a goatee and a check shirt, and that was the man who was responsible for the shooting, who had taken the call and had walked out. So the theory is that he took the call, he walked out, this random man, and James was actually the second shooter who came in after him. There was an extra gas mask that was dropped at the scene on the other side of the theatre, and that was never tested for any DNA. They don't know whose it was. It could have been James's, could have been a policeman, or it could have been a second shooter. They don't know. As far as we know though, the police didn't wear gas masks on that night, it was just James. Quite a few witnesses said that there was a second shooter, and one man in particular said there were 2 gas canisters sent from either side of the room, not just one, and he actually saw them cross in mid-air, so they had to be coming from 2 different directions. And apparently when people talk about a second shooter or the possibility of one, the news kind of stopped giving them the airtime. They just go to interview people who said straight away it was James. Another theory is that it wasn't James who did it at all, and it was other people. He seemed really out of it when they arrested him and through the trial and everything, and I've even seen pictures, even up to yesterday, saying it's not the same person that was in the trial that the mugshot is taken off, which I find really strange. I haven't looked into that one properly. Getting back to it anyway, it said that it might not have been James who did it. He was so out of it that they think someone else did it and basically blamed it on him. So as I said, I'm not going to go into all the conspiracy theories because we will be here all day, I promise you. There's so many good podcasts and documentaries about it, so I don't just want to, repeat everything they've just said, but honestly, if you're into conspiracy theories, look into it. Just want to say dead quickly, even though I am talking about conspiracy theories that James may not be responsible, I'm in no way defending him. I think what he did was absolutely horrendous. I don't need to, you know how angry I get over these cases, I don't need to say much more. Mental health is a tricky one though because you can't see it. Who knows if he is just that intelligent that he knew exactly what to say, exactly what to do to be able to kind of get a lesser sentence or avoid the death sentence. I don't know. But I do find it really strange that he just knew he was going to get caught. I know people get kicks from going to prison. I personally don't get it whatsoever. It's like the last place I'd ever want to be. I just wish that if he was mentally ill, he'd have got the help he needed. I'm not blaming anyone in particular, I'm just saying in general, I wish he'd have got help if he was mentally ill, and this may have been avoided. If he did plan this and he's not mentally ill and it's just an excuse, then that is just the most horrible thing to do. So all the victims and survivors and the families are all in my thoughts today. I'm really sad that this happened. I really wish it could have been avoided somehow, and I want to say if you do look into this trial, the witness statements of the family members and friends and people who were there are really, really, really sad. Just letting you know. I only spoke about a couple, there were hundreds of people there that night and quite a few that testified in court, and yeah, it's really, really upsetting. I hope you found this case interesting. Revisiting it was definitely interesting for me. I learned so much more, and it's made me kind of want to bring back all the cases that I've pushed out my mind and thought, no, I'm done with that. I want to know more about a lot of them. So please let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Like and subscribe and turn the notification bell on so you know when I upload. I upload a true crime video every single Sunday, and if you've got any recommendations or requests of cases that you think I'd want to cover, then let me know. Just bearing in mind that I try not to cover ones that have been already covered lots of times by other true crime YouTubers or ones that everyone knows everything about already. Just cause there's people who are already doing amazing jobs and I don't want to just repeat everything that they've said. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one.